conservation of Atlantic tunas, better known as ICAT. Buenas tardes y bienvenidos a este webinar sobre estrategias de captura de túnidos de la Comisión Internacional para la Conservación de Atún Atlántico, más conocido como KICA. Bonjour et bienvenue à ce webinaire sur les stratégies de pêche pour le thon et le thon comme au sein de la Commission internationale pour la conservation des thonides de l'Atlantique, mieux connue sous le nom KICTA. This webinar has simultaneous translation available from English into French and Spanish and vice versa. If you want translation, please click on the interpretation button on the toolbar below in the Zoom screen and choose your language that you want to have translated. You can go back simply by clicking the button once more and then undo the translation. To have this option available, you should have downloaded an updated version of Zoom, but in most cases that goes automatically. Este seminario web tiene una traducción simultánea disponible de inglés a francés y español y viceversa. Si desea una traducción, haga clic en el botón traducción en la barra de herramientas a continuación en la pantalla Zoom y elija su traducción. Puede volver simplemente haciendo clic en el botón una vez más y para tener esta opción disponible debe haber descargado una versión actualizada de Zoom. Ce webinaire a une traduction simultanée disponible de l'anglais vers le français et l'espagnol et vice-versa. Si vous voulez une traduction, vous pouvez cliquer sur le bouton traduction dans la barre d'outils ci-dessous sur l'écran Zoom et choisissez votre traduction. Vous pouvez revenir en arrière simplement en cliquant une fois de plus sur le bouton. Pour que cette option soit disponible, vous devez avoir téléchargé une version mise à jour de Zoom. We will continue in English now. Co-hosts, the Pew Charitable Trusts, the Global Tuna Alliance, the Tuna Protection Alliance, and the website harveststrategy.org welcome you on this event that tries to inform stakeholders in the European tuna market, in particularly the trade and retail, about the harvest strategies and why it is in their interest to have them in place in the international management of tuna stocks. There is a clear urgency for improving strong international management of tuna stocks. Globally, the status of healthy stocks is rapidly decreasing. According to the latest ISSF survey this year, we have still 80.5% of the world catches sourced from stocks that are at healthy levels of abundance. But this is decreasing rapidly, of almost 88% of the status 2 years earlier. Meanwhile, a scientific study published this month says that the global canned tuna demand is set to increase 34% in the next 3 decades. The tuna fleets in certain parts of the world are rapidly expanding, unfortunately with the help of important government financial funding. And next to this growing fleet overcapacity, we have to cope with the huge problem of illegal, unreported and unregulated fishing. But the most important are the steps to get a strong management to restore and protect sustainable stocks of tuna, being pivotal to guarantee a sustainable future for the fish. This afternoon, we concentrate on the Atlantic Ocean. The good news is that we have the success story of the Atlantic bluefin tuna, the iconic species that was seriously threatened at the start of the century, but has been recovering in the last decade. The management measures of ICAT and the efforts of the fisheries contributed to this recovery. So management can really work. This year's ICAT has to decide on the final piece of good management, through harvest strategies as a step that locks in the sustainable management for the years to come. That would be an important step, not only for the bluefin tuna, but for other tuna species like the Atlantic tropical tunas and swordfish that are still on the agenda to get their harvest strategies done. This afternoon, we are together with an important group of stakeholders in the tuna supply chain that until recently were not much in the spotlight when it came to the interest in sustainable tuna management. Trade and retailers have a vested interest in a sustainable flow of tuna to deliver to their consumers. We talk of markets that involve billions of euros worldwide. They must cope with a rapidly growing demand of sustainable tuna and invest increasingly in certifications like the MSC label. Modern management of tuna stocks with harvest strategies is key for their business in the years to come. This afternoon, we will learn more about these management tools and their crucial importance for the markets. We have a rich program of speakers to clarify what harvest strategy actually mean for the Atlantic tunas and how the agenda looks like. After the presentation on bluefin tuna, the audience will be asked to participate in a short poll. And we finish this webinar with a roundtable of the speakers for discussion and questions from the audience. You might have noticed that you are muted as audience. Nonetheless, we invite you to post all your questions to the speakers or in general, pushing the Q&A button at the toolbar down below. Please leave your name and organization with the question so that we know where it comes from. We'll pick your questions up with roundtable discussion and the questions at the end. So I think that's all set then. Yeah, the chat function is working also, but as said, questions can be posted at the Q&A button. What you can find in the chat is, at least for the moment, how the translation works for those who came in later or forgot to hear what I said. So you always can look it back in there. Okay. So the first speaker will be somebody with a lot of experience in harvest strategies and ICAT in particular, Dr. Hilario Murua. He's a senior scientist at the International Seafood Sustainability Foundation, ISSF. We have mentioned it earlier for their research. And currently, he's the chair of the IOTC Working Party on Methods. That's not the Atlantic, of course, but the Indian Ocean. But nonetheless, somebody who knows about the management organizations and have a lot of experience. He has more than 20 years experience in fish population dynamics, assessments and management. He has served as a rapporteur for the Big Eye Species Group at the International Commission for Conservation of Atlantic Tuna, ICAT. Bienvenido, Hilario. Gracias por atender. Your presentation will be in English. So please, for translation, use the button down below. So let's say harvest strategy is for many, even in the tuna industry and markets, a faraway concept they might have heard of, but have no idea what it's all about. To explain the issue, let's start. Basically, is it about fisheries management?
Thanks, Stephen, and good afternoon to all. And first, let me thank you and the organizer for inviting me to this event. It is a pleasure to be here. Yes, of course, harvest strategy or management procedure, because depending on the region, is used management procedure or harvest strategy, so both things are the same. It's about fishery management with the goal to generate sustainable economic and social benefits while conserving the productivity of the fish stocks. ensuring their long-term sustainability and minimizing fisheries' direct and indirect impact on wider ecosystem. And for that, we, the scientists, we need to monitor fisheries, collect data, assess the status of this population, and adopt sustainable level of harvest. In short, we need to have the capacity, or the reformers need to have the capacity through management measures to adjust and control fishing in response to change in resource status. Next slide, please. And how this is currently done when harvest strategies are not in place. So scientists collect the data from the fishery first, then they carry out stock assessment to estimate the historical and current status of the stock. Then they project the population into the future. That's a kind of demographic analysis considering the individuals that are born and are died every year to see what will happen with different catch levels. And the scientists provide advice on reasonable harvest levels and catch advice. That is trying to respond to the question, what if catches are increased by 5%, 10%, or decreased by 5%, 10%, 15%, and so on. So in summary, in most cases, currently the provision of advice is a risk assessment advice. And then the managers need to manage that risk, just in the right-hand figure. But what happened in reality, in most of the cases, without clear agreed long-term objectives, the decision is not part of the strategy, of this strategy. And therefore, the need of consensus makes a long negotiation process at Commission level, increasing the management and policy industry uncertainty. Because, as I said, in most cases, the scientific advice is not linked to clear adopted management objectives, the management action is somewhat relaxed, delayed, or often ignored, mostly due to competing interests such as commercial, economic, development, and conservation among different stakeholders. So next slide, please.
No, I just have a question. Just to make it clear, this is all done in an organization like ICAT. So the whole procedure that people know where it's done, as far as it's concerned for the Atlantic tuna, takes place in ICAT, and that's also a part of the discussion between, you said, the scientific at the one side, and then the managers on the other side. Which managers are we talking? Who are these managers in ICAT?
Yes, that is done in ICAT or in IRTCs in the referendum process, and the managers are the members of ICAT or IRTCs, the CPCs, the member states of ICAT. Of course, in that arena or that commission, the different stakeholders also play a role, but basically when I talk managers or I mention managers are the CPCs.
Yeah, okay, so that's important to know also for the industry, that their countries where they're based are having a voice in this dealing and wheeling on harvest strategies, and they are the ones who have this discussion with scientists to come to this this whole system. So to put it simply, this harvest strategies is a pre-agreed procedure that everybody accepts in an organization like ICAT as a base for tuna stock management?
Yes, that's right. It's as I explained before, the process, the current process, and then there will be that from the stock assessment approach, the harvest strategy approach is a different approach. And basically, as you say, is and here as Doc very clearly stated, a harvest strategy is all about agreeing the rules of the game before it is played.
Who's Doc Butterworth? Not everybody will know him.
It is a scientist that firstly developed or work a lot with the MSc and the harvest strategy, and he was heavily involved in the first harvest strategy adopted in a tuna reform, that the southern bluefin tuna harvest strategy adopted in the CCSBT. Okay. So next slide. So until now I explained the stockastic approach, but the harvest strategy is a different approach. And in more detail, a harvest strategy is an agreed basis for monitoring the stock of the population and the fishery, and assessing a fishery and adjusting the level of fishing depending on the stock status, using a specified management measure based on the harvest control rule to achieve specific objectives. So the harvest strategy describes how the goals, the management goals, will be achieved by the means or resources. It is a process or a strategy of setting the goals, determining the actions to achieve the goals, and mobilizing the resources to execute those actions. So as Doc said, agreeing the rules before the game is played. That's the slide.
Yeah. It's all about, in effect, your objectives. What do you want in your tuna fisheries, and what do you want to reach? What level of stocks, for instance, and how do you want to reach that? What elements are important to make these objectives work?
Next slide. I will facilitate the discussion. Yes, it's about where you want to have your fishery and population in the future. That is, what are your objectives for the fishery population, and how, when you get to that, the target or the pre-agreed objectives. And very important element of the harvest strategy is the management extrapolation. That is the evaluation process that determines the best way or harvest strategy to achieve where you want to be or the target. That is a simulation process to select a harvest strategy, meeting the target and providing most appropriate trade-offs between competing management objectives on status, yield, catch stability, and safety, because different members of the RFMO or ICAT and different stakeholders will have a different objectives. They will have competing objectives. One CPC will prefer or will be more conservative than other. One CPC will have more interest or other, and will like to maintain the catch.
Just to clarify, what kind, can you give an example of those conflicts between the different CPCs, the member states in ICAT?
I'm not going to enter in details, but I think in general, one CPC, yes, that is a general. I'm not going to enter in the specific because it depends on the species and the discussion. But one CPC can prefer to have a larger probability of recovery or a larger probability of the stock being in the green quadrant of the cover plot without entering the details to explain the cover plot. Another one will prefer to maintain a higher catch level and then delay a bit the recovery of the stock. So there are competing interests of maintaining the catch stability against, there is a trade-off always between conservation and yield. So as large as the yield, less conservation, and another way around.
Is it strange to suggest that, for instance, the countries that have the tuna stocks in their waters but don't fish are maybe more interested in having lesser fishing in the total area than the countries that are the flag states of the fleets that are interested in catching more tuna?
I mean, there are many competing interests. It's not only the CPCs, also among the different stakeholders within a particular CPC. So it's finding a trade-off that may happy everyone. So that's the rationale behind of the harvest strategy.
Yeah.
So basically, the MSC, the management strategy is like a GPS that tells you the shorter journey, the quickest journey, the journey with nicer landscape to see, the journey to visit the nicer city, and so on. And then depending on your pre-agreed objective, you select your journey.
Okay, so to resume, these are elements that come back to define the harvest strategies. You have your objectives, what do you want to do with your stocks? You have your limit, so-called limit reference points and harvest control rules. You have your acceptable levels of risk, and you have your monitoring strategy, and finally the management strategy evaluation, MSE. It's a thing that regularly comes back to see altogether how things turn out. We see the MSC many times being discussed, also in ICAT. How does it work? How do we know Harvard's strategies work out fine?
I mean, the elements that you say that are those, the management objectives. The manager needs to define the operational objectives, including timeframes for the fishery or stock, the reference point, the target and limit reference point for each stock, the acceptable level of risk of not reaching limit reference points, a harvest control rules, the decision rule that aim to achieve the target reference point and aim to avoid the limit reference point, but also other operational objectives, and then the management strategy evaluation, that is the evaluation of the performance of the proposed harvest control rules against management objectives, including the risk assessment. So the MSC is the process and is the simulation framework to identify and select the best harvest strategy among a set of candidate and management strategies. So can you move to the next slide, Tom, please? So basically what MSC is doing is finding the best management procedure or the harvest strategy for candidate management procedure or harvest strategies. So basically MSC identify and select the best harvest strategy, the process of moving from the left figure in the slide with many candidate harvest strategy to the right where the agreed harvest strategy is adopted. And a simulation process like that does not consist of a series of linear steps. Instead, it's a feedback and dialogue is needed between managers, ICAT commissioners or CPCs, scientists and other stakeholders. And because the approach, as I said before, demands clear objectives to do the evaluation against, the method forces participants to be clear about their objectives and to specify performance indicators for each operational objective. For example, as I said before, the probability of being the population on the green of the cover plot as a metric of status, or average yield as a metric of yield, or the percentage of avoiding the limit reference point as a metric of safety for the population, to quantify whether goals have been achieved or not.
Yeah, so just to go back, because do not to go too much into detail, because it's a lot of information for people who are not really into it. In the end, the outcome of this MSC, this management strategy evaluation, is a Harvard strategy as a kind of automized process that decides each year automatically what has to be done with the stock. So that is in the end what we are working, or ICAT is working on to get done. What exactly are the advantages of such a harvest strategy? Why is it so important to have them in place?
Yes, that's right. It's an adaptive automatic management system that avoids delaying no response to scientific advice because objectives are pre-agreed. So through the harvest control rule or the harvest strategy, the management actions is linked to the stock status, and therefore the long discussions during the commission meetings are avoided because there is a relation between the objectives and the actions. So depending on the stock status, because an objective has been agreed before.
Maybe we could go to the next slide to make it
the
more
actions
graphic.
has been already agreed. So for every level of estimate biomass or indicator of abundance, a management measure to ensure a determined catch level fishing mortality is prescribed or is adopted. And this is management measure is adapted so as to ensure that to achieve the objectives. So instead of being discussing at the commission level, the discussion has been already, the discussion has already taken place, and there is an agreed objectives, and therefore then it's an automatic process. So the major benefit of the harvest strategy is that it provides stability to the system and provides a pre-agreed and transparent management basis for decision making. It also provides greater certainty for all the stakeholders because in that feedback and discussion, all the stakeholders has been involved. It also designed to achieve an agreed balance between competing management objectives, as we discussed briefly before. For example, sustainability versus economic. It also provides a better chance of achieving management objectives, as the management strategy relation allows to identify a strategy or a harvest strategy that is robust to many uncertainties that are in the system, biological, fishery data, and so on. It demonstrates to the community that you are managing the stock responsibly. But it also comes with challenges. It is not straightforward. The consultative process and evaluation process can take several years and is expensive. For example, mentioning DAC, the CCSBT or the Southern Bluefin Tuna harvest strategy adoption took more than 10 years. And
How much? Sorry?
More than 10 years. It was a very difficult one. It was just one species in one RFMO, so CCSBT only managed one species.
Now, when it comes, of course, that's when we have those harvest strategies. Now, when it comes to ICAT, the Atlantic Ocean, where do we stand in adopting these harvest strategies? Maybe in the next slide we can see.
Yeah, but Stephen, let me to go to a slide. Previous slide, because I think that is one point important here that I missed to say. One previous one, please. Don't. Sorry for that. Yeah, I think that here it's also important to that different elements has different partners or stakeholders have different responsibilities. And very briefly, it's a consultative process, a dialogue process. And the technical implementation is for the scientists, but the consultative process, the manager should be involved and all the stakeholders. Managers are responsible for setting the objectives. The performance measures or metrics for each objective is also responsibility of management with the help of scientists. But the technical part of developing operating models and MSC simulation is the responsibility for scientists. And finally, the final responsibility to compare and adopt a harvest strategies of managers. Managers is CPCs, and of course, then the stakeholders, different stakeholders can suggest or push or advocate for adopting a particular harvest strategy or harvest strategy in general.
Yeah, and so now it's a mixture of political process, but with a lot of scientific influence. Maybe we could go to the last two slides.
Yeah,
particularly
yeah, that is the.
Where do we stand? Where do we stand with the harvest strategies?
Yeah, in this table, you can see the work plan that was adopted in last year or 2 years ago in the Commission. As you all know, a full harvest strategy for Northern Aracor was adopted last year, including all elements of the process. So objectives, performance metrics, operating model, candidate MPs, and therefore, including all the elements. For Bluefin Tuna, the work is quite mature and advanced. There have been meetings to discuss agree on objectives, present candidate harvest strategies, and the plan is that the Commission will adopt a strategy for both stocks of Bluefin Tuna in November 2022. We'll see if that happens.
That's the important thing, finally to make the whole process working.
For swordfish, I think that Shanna will explain it in more detail later on, but basically it's progressing more slowly than Bluefin Tuna, and the technical work of developing operating model and candidate MPs has started. And the plan is that the objectives will be agreed this year so as to inform the dialogue for final adoption of a harvest strategy in 2023. For tropical tunas, the work is in standby as the Commission focused priority on Bluefin Tuna and swordfish, because the complexity of the multi-species nature of the tropical tuna fisheries. The intention here is to do a multi-species MSC or harvest strategy for the 3 tropical eastern stocks, and the work will be resumed after the adoption of Bluefin Tuna MP, and the plan is to have a harvest strategy of western skipjack by 2023 and a harvest strategy for the multi-species.
Yeah, just to explain, the tropicals are the tropicals are the most important one for the market. So then we're talking about basically yellowfin, skipjack, and blue and big eye, no?
Yes. And that the plan is for by 2024.
Yeah, so this calendar is quite important because if there is a moment for the markets also to influence this process through their representatives in ICAT, which are in this case their politicians and the ministers who involved in this process through ICAT, these are the moments that certain decisions will be made that can be of direct importance for trade and retail in the European market.
That's right, but also, as I said, it's a feedback and dialogue process. So there are, in between, there are also important meetings where objectives and other elements of the harvest strategy are discussed. And I think that there are also important meetings, those where all stakeholders should be involved, ideally. Okay. And that is all from my side. Hope it was useful and happy to answer any question you may have. Yeah, well, thank you very much, Hilario. It's a complicated story, the whole way the harvest strategy works in ICAT, especially for those who have heard about it but don't have really a clue what's happening in this organization. But they are confronted with the results of it. And as we see, we'll see later that has a direct influence on their trade and their the whole way the sustainable tuna is coming on the market. Thank you for your clear explanation, and I think we leave the questions to the end. So if you have any specific questions for Hilario Murua, please post them on the Q&A button, and we'll pick them up later. Okay. The next issue is we're going now a bit from harvest strategies to the markets. As we just have seen, these harvest strategies have a certain agenda to get in place in ICAT, but also in the other management organizations worldwide. And that, of course, has a direct effect on the markets, in particularly trade and retail. We have with us two representatives of quite recent active NGOs on this side of the chain. It's Tom Pickerel on the one hand. He's executive director of the Global Tuna Alliance, GTA, and Flory Lodge, she's manager of the Tuna Protection Alliance. Both are representing their part of the market, those who are member of their associations. Tom Pickerel, he's a marine biologist with 15-year experience in seafood sustainability, including wild fisheries and shellfish aquaculture, certification schemes and consumer guides, and social responsibility in seafood. He's founder of the Toma La Mola Consulting. I always have difficulty with that word. Flory Lott is agricultural engineer by training, with over 30 years of experience in the retail sector, starting a career at the fish department of the French retailer Auchan as a department manager before joining TUPA and the Earthworm Foundation. Welcome, both of you. So just to start, what can you tell us about the market stakeholders that joined GTA, the Global Tuna Alliance, and TUPA? Maybe first Flory and then Tom.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for inviting me to speak today. I'm delighted to be here. So I will talk a little bit about TUPA. It's a pre-competitive initiative driven by the canned tuna players who are sharing the same commitment for the tuna sector to adopt better fishing practices and better fisheries management. The aim is to restore the balance and also safeguard tuna resources for future generations. So you can see the partners displayed on the slide. So the partners are gathering to pool their resources and energy and to be able to talk with a united voice towards the industry players and the tuna RFMOs in order to bring change in the sector. So the Tupa partners are mainly retailers and canneries, and the group is focused on the French and Belgian market.
Great, thank you, Florie, and thank you, Stephen. Good afternoon, everyone. So the Global Tuna Alliance, very similar to TUPA, is a pre-competitive collaboration of seafood businesses with an interest in tuna. And they've come together via themselves, there's no NGO setting up the GTA, to try to use their collective buying power to improve the environmental and social responsibility performance of the tuna fisheries that they source from. So we have a 5-year strategy, we're 1 year through it, and that sets out what our ambitions are. And of course, unsurprisingly, much of that is to do with using our power to try to influence the tuna RFMOs to act in a responsible way. And a big part of that is the implementation of harvest strategies. Okay, you can see here, these are our partners. We have 40 partners on there, and I'm pleased to say, as of yesterday, we have our first partner from Papua New Guinea.
Okay, well, it's growing now. So in the tuna world, we are actually used to focus on fisheries when it comes to management, and many times forget the markets and chains of tuna business, where actually a big part of the added value, jobs and interests are situated. Tom, can you give a bit of an insight of this part of the tuna world that forms part of GTA and the GTA partners?
Yeah, absolutely. So we tried to get an idea of the scale of the GTA partnership in 2020. So these figures are out of date now. We're currently running a second survey to get this information. But you can see here the scale of the businesses involved are quite vast. And of course, not all of the figures on the left are associated with just tuna. But the key take-homes we found from our survey was that GTA partners bought 1.27 million tons of tuna in 2020. That's about 20% or 1/5 of the global production of the key commercial species. And that's worth about $1.3 billion US. So our aim is to use this collective power to actually drive change. So our membership is all the way from processors, all the way through the supply chain to importers, to retailers, to food service. So yeah, it captures the supply chain and it complements our colleagues in TUPA.
Yeah, so likewise, how about TUPA, Florie?
So with regards to the scale of TUPA, it's a bit more restricted than the GTA one. As I mentioned, it is focused on the French and Belgian markets, whereas GTA is more global now. But still, it is worth noting that the 12 partners, they combine altogether a lot of employees. And with regards to tuna, the volumes will represent approximately 1% of the global tuna that it's caught worldwide. And it is interesting also to note that this tuna is coming from approximately 700 tuna fishing vessels, both industrial and small-scale vessels.
Okay, that gives an impression of the amount and the impact. Now, your partners depend in their sourcing of tuna, at least partly on the tuna stocks in the Atlantic Ocean and the Mediterranean. As we all know, the situation of tuna stocks, especially with consumers, is always much influenced by impression. Many of us have seen the documentary, or if you want to call it like that, Seaspiracy, that had a big impact. I can imagine that also influenced the whole strategy of, for instance, retailers. Now, to have an insight of the state of the stocks in the Atlantic, could we have a bit of an idea what the state of the stocks actually are?
Yeah, certainly. This is a tool from the Certification and Ratings Collaboration, which is a group of NGOs, who do seafood ratings, plus certification bodies, who have come together to pool the outputs of their work to try to give a one-stop shop of the performance of seafood. It's a really good tool to have a play with, and I recommend it. Anyone goes on and just accesses the tool. This graphic here is a filtered down version of tuna from the ICAT region, so that you're actually able to narrow it down by RFMO. So you can see here, there's a very small amount, 8.6%, which is MSC certified. This is by volume. And then you have some Seafood Watch, which is the Monterey Bay Aquarium Seafood Program, green and amber rated, which is a buy rating. That's about 15%. But then you have actually Seafood Watch red rated, which is an avoid rating, so about a third of production. And then you do see nearly 40% in fishery improvement projects. So that's obviously fisheries that need some improvement, but that's great to see that level there, 40%. So it is quite clear to see from this image that there are a few fisheries operating at the sort of the highest level of performance. There are many more that are got a lot of challenges that need addressing, but the good news is 40% by volume are in fishery improvement projects. So that sort of begs the question, Steve, why are these fisheries not all in the green of this?
Yeah,
and
ISSF,
obviously Hilario from ISSF, ISSF do some amazing resources. This is one I'm particularly fond of. I know that Flora uses this as well. What they've done every year, they take the tuna stocks, not the fisheries, but the stocks, and they run it against the MSC standard or elements of the standard. And this is P1. So if you're familiar with the Marine Stewardship Council, P1 is one of three the columns of the standard. And this one relates to the status of the stock. And what this shows is these are the main tuna species in the Atlantic. And it's very clear that stock status, so the numbers of fish, is not the issue. You can see we've got the lowest is a 70, and you need a 60, below a 60 is a fail according to the MSC. The big area of concern is the harvest strategy, harvest control rules. And you can see this area of yellow and red. And this is actually causing the P1 scores at the bottom there to be fails. So what this is saying, and Hilario mentioned it, precisely to this point, the stocks are okay, but the management is not. The management is lacking, and that's what's holding back these fisheries from getting higher scores, if you'd like to use that analogy. So hopefully that answers that question, Stephen, what the status is and what's causing it.
Yeah, so to resume it, we are not in a critical situation when it comes to the stock, but as a matter of fact, the management to assure that these stocks in the future will be in the green, so to say, is not in place, and therefore we really have to worry because time is getting shorter, and we need to have these management tools in place. Now, on the one hand, we see a development of tuna stocks with lagging sustainability that might eventually even increase. On the other hand, a growing demand of sustainable sourcing with the consumers. So what is the position of your stakeholders? What position do they take? Tom and Flory afterward.
Yeah, it's hugely important. And most, I would say many, if not all, of the seafood supply chain companies are looking beyond just absolute numbers of fish for the reasons you said, Stephen. It's all very well having a healthy stock today, but will you have it tomorrow? And it's not guaranteed if you don't have robust management in place. We carried out a survey last year as part of our 5-year strategy, and 71% of GTA partners have publicly committed to sourcing 100% of tuna products from fisheries from GSSI recognized certification schemes, or are in a pathway to sustainability. So that's like a fishery improvement project. And of course, for these to succeed, you need to have harvest strategies in place.
Yeah, just to make it clear, the GSSI recognized certification, that's basically MSC.
There's a couple of fishery certifications, but MSC is by far the biggest wild fishery one.
And then the FIPS, just to make it clear, it's not a certification as such, but a way to go forward to reach for a certification. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yes, it's a generally a pathway to certification. It doesn't have to be, of course, but that seems to be the most appropriate way, the most common way.
Okay. And with TUPA?
Well, with regards to TUPA, when it has been formed 4 years ago, the foundation of the group that united the partners was the writing and then the publication of a manifesto towards which each partner committed. So the manifesto pledges for the partners to sell by 2025 responsible tuna. And TUPA partners are aiming at 3 objectives. So preserve the tuna resource, fight against IUU fishing, and also respect workers' rights. Yeah. And obviously, under tuna resource, a great attention is on the status of the stock. But as we just said, it's not only the status now, it's how to guarantee that the stock health will be maintained in the future. So it's also a lot about the management.
Yeah, just very short, because some people can get a bit confused. You say that you have the ambition to propose responsible tuna on sale by 2025. What is the difference between responsible and sustainable tuna? Yeah,
sure. So with regards to this semantic that we are using within TUPA, so the way that TUPA partners see it, sustainable means MSC certified or equivalent scheme, and responsible is broader. So here we mean responsible. It is about resources and people, not only resource. And certification is not an end goal, but just, let's say, one of the means towards the achievement of the goal.
Okay. So now, how do harvest strategies fits in the picture? It certainly is not a thing the consumer is aware of, but can you picture the importance to your partners of harvest strategy?
Yes, sorry, Sim. Yes, absolutely. Harvest strategies form a cornerstone of the work of the Global Tuna Alliance. What we get across to our partners is that using the framework that Hilaria has mentioned before, explaining what a harvest strategy is and explaining how it relates to their sourcing policies. So, by having a harvest strategy in place with all the elements, all the components, this is what you get. So it's once you explain the concept, I think it's pretty straightforward for people to get a grasp of and understand. And for them to meet their seafood sourcing commitments, they understand that we've got to have harvest strategies in place. So it forms a central part of our advocacy to the tuna RFMOs. And the strategy for doing that is one that TUPA and GTA share. We often do it collectively in joint advocacy. If you take the supply chain in the bottom left, we engage with the catching sector. That can be done through requesting that their suppliers engage with the catching sector directly if it goes through links in the chain, but also through saying these are our sourcing requirements. In the future, we want to buy tuna from fisheries with harvest strategies in place. Not tomorrow, but in a couple of years, they have to be in place. So you're actually putting that towards the catching sector as a vital component in the tuna supply chain. The idea here is to get a positive reaction from the catching sector to say, okay, well, if we do this, then we have continuity of market access and maybe longevity of product. We also engage with the RFMO delegates directly. There should be a blue arrow there. And that is more traditional advocacy of the market saying, we buy X thousand tons of tuna from your economy, and we need this in place. Otherwise, we may have to review our sourcing decisions.
Okay, that's clear. So it's very practical in that sense. The market who is, showing its interest and pushing forward to a more sustainable supply through harvest strategies. To wrap it up, you are fast-growing organizations. How do you like the markets to get involved with defending their sustainable sourcing? You already mentioned some, but maybe you could expand.
Do you want to go first, Flori?
Yeah, sorry, I lost it. So with regards to how the partners of Tupa seek harvest strategies, I think it is important to specify that it's also a work in progress on the side of the market. Since at the beginning, the focus of the Tupa partners was really a stock status approach, so green or red light to go and source. And it's transitioning now to a more holistic approach, taking into account the stock management. And really to say, okay, we need to ensure that the green light is there and will stay there. So to do that, Tupa partners are advocating towards TRFMOs and encouraging them to develop harvest strategies. So especially for tropical tunas, because Tupa is focusing on tropical tunas.
Yeah, okay. Tom?
And I've just put some text from our 5-year strategy there, so you can see how this is incorporated into sort of the fundamentals of our work. So under sourcing requirements, we're asking partners to develop a corporate policy. So don't just focus on, what was in the old days of a seafood policy was maybe, we buy MSC. Then it sort of expanded to GSS, I recognize. But we're saying you can be really specific in your seafood policy and say, we are going to do this. And we're only going to buy from fisheries with harvest strategies at some point in the future. So you put that pressure on. Request suppliers engage. So it's putting that pressure through the supply chain, but also, as Flori mentioned, the more traditional advocacy with the decision makers. And we're moving away from engaging with delegates to focusing as well on engaging with the fisheries ministers and even senior to that.
Okay, yeah, so it clearly has also a political side of it. In the end, it's a political decision what kind of harvest strategies we will have in the future, I guess.
That's right, Stephen. And both GTA and Tupa, we're going to be looking at a joint position that we will send to ICAT delegates later this year. We've done this in the past. It's very effective because we're incredibly aligned on this. Noting the need for harvest strategies and get bluefin over the line and have a pathway for other species. We call on members of the supply chain who are not engaged with us to engage with delegates, because the market voice is really important. And there is an opportunity for you to say what you want and why you want it and what are the consequences if it doesn't happen. And finally, if this is a bit too much to do it on your own, join GTA or Tupa, because we're here, we're doing it, and we welcome new members, and we can provide you the support that you need for that.
Okay, that's clear. Thank you very much, both of you, Flori Lot and Tom Pickerel, for your clear explanation of the work you're doing, and it paints a bit the whole perspective of what's going on. Markets who are getting more active to defend their interest in ICAT, and then in particularly when it comes to harvest strategies. Next speaker is, he was already waiting patiently in the upside part of the Zoom, Hector Fernandez. He's one of those market partners that has a, let's say, a big influence. He's a key player, or at least his company, Bolton Food, which is part of the Bolton group, is one of the biggest players, I can say, worldwide when it comes to tuna trade. And we are very happy to have you here, Hector, because your voice is important in this perspective. You yourself are Sustainable Development Manager of Bolton Group, and you have a long trajectory on development and review of corporate policies, codes and manuals on sustainable fisheries, and about policies and procedures. So thank you for joining. Now, for many people in the business, Bolton Food is a very well-known entity, of course, as a key player in the European and global tuna chain. But not being a brand, outsiders don't know much about you. Perhaps you can explain a bit what Bolton Food stands for.
Thank you, Stephen. Thanks for thinking of Bolton Food to participate in this event, and thank you for inviting me. Yes, please, next slide. Bolton Food is a business unit, it's the tuna producing business unit of Bolton Group. Bolton Group is a corporation holding that comprises business units from adhesives to home and personal care and multiple other business units and products. In this field of food, and mostly for the seafood and tuna, the two main companies inside this Bolton Group matrix are, for one side, Bolton Food. We are the canned tuna, canned seafood division of the company, or the mother company, and also from recent years, Trimarine, that is our brother company inside the holding, that guarantees a kind of vertical integration and the sourcing of responsible tuna for not only Bolton Food, but also Trimarine has external activity in trading responsible tuna globally. Bolton Food, we have 11 well-recognized and reputed brands, leading in a lot of markets and countries, from Rio Mare to Sopiquet, Isabel, Cook. We represent more than 10% of the canned tuna globally. Number one in Italy in canned fish, number one in France and Italy in mackerel, and we are a leading presence in other markets and countries. We have more than 11,000 employees, 59 offices, 15 plants. Well, this I think it describes a little bit the magnitude and the scale of the company. Next.
Yeah, because being a big player means that your sourcing of tuna is widespread over different oceans, amongst which the Atlantic. Tuna has a complicated value chain. That's correct.
That's for sure. And you can see how we describe from fishing to the transformation, transport, to the processing, and to reach the retailers and the final customer. The longer the supply chain is, the more inertia it has. So decisions that you take, you cannot see the results and the impact tomorrow. You have to wait months, even years, to see how the path just turns to the rough pathway if you take the right measures. So it's not an immediate reaction in the results in the market. And also that the tropical tunas are a highly migrant fish that we source all over the world, and for instance, we do source the mainly sourcing from the Pacific Ocean. We do have a 40% from the Western Pacific Ocean, 33% from the Eastern Pacific Ocean, also the Indian Ocean, a little bit less than 20%. And even though the Atlantic Ocean is not the first for us in the relative terms, due to the scale of our company, the absolute values are also very important with that. And just to say that for in recent years, the evolution of the species that we are using is changing. It's because of also the sustainability factors and context. Yes, growing the use of skipjack. That's, generally speaking, more sustainable or more abundant, and yellowfin is reducing the volume right now due to the scarcity of sustainable sourcing and fisheries.
Yeah. So to put it in perspective, as you painted, it's because of the complicated supply chain. You are very much into the kind of stability and predictability of the sourcing of your tuna, in particular sustainable sourcing of your tuna, which makes it, of course, very important that you can have systems to have this stability around. As far as the Atlantic is concerned, what is the state of the Atlantic stocks Bolton is sourcing from?
Next slide, please. As you already described, the general state of abundance for the tropical tunas, focusing on the tropical tunas in the Atlantic Ocean, is not critical. It has its problems. For instance, the big eye is still suffering. Well, the stock is overfished. It's not the information, the data that Hilario shared with us also, because we are proud founding members of ISSF and working actively with him. Yes, we have issues with the abundance and with the fishing mortality. But the main problems that we have is that, and I'm going to be not very scientific, but I want to my message to go through. The main problem is that the fisheries are not under control. Related also with the stability that is required for these kind of sectors, and most for the tuna sector that has this big, huge inertia from catches to the final products. What I mean that the fishery is not under control, I linked to the harvest strategies in here and the reaction versus responsiveness that we are going to mention in a moment. So yes, we are of course we congratulate for the adoption of a complete harvest strategy for North Atlantic albacore. By the way, it's the first time that the ICAT has adopted a full harvest strategy, and it's more than welcome in here. But we have to understand that harvest strategies are not something that we wish are implemented, but are critical for the long-term sustainability of the fisheries and the stocks and populations. And also, as you say, and you know that MSC has already put in place deadlines that has to be contemplated as limiting points for us to get in place these harvest strategies which should contain harvest control rules. By the way, just to finish this point, again, what is harvest strategies is in a very, very operational definition of them are pre-agreed science-based approach to decision making. So these are the most important part of the is they are pre-agreed. So the responses, well, it brings together managers and scientists, as Hilario was saying in the beginning, to see the rules of the game, and not only the rules of the game, but also which are the KPIs, the indicators that are going to demonstrate progress towards the goal that we want to reach. And
so Hector, if I understand you well, you basically say, okay, without harvest strategies, actually the whole tuna management in the international organizations like we have ICAT and all the other RFMOs is impossible.
Yes, please, next slide. And yes, and in here is the message, the final message that I want to bring to you is that yeah, I said here, no management can be based on reacting, but in anticipating. So as I learned in school, to manage is to foresee. So if you do not have harvest strategies in place, and I was just taking notes in here, and from Hilarius, and said to me again, if there is no harvest strategy in place, what triggers the decision-making process in the RFMO? A catastrophe, or what? You know, if we don't have everything systematic, from the frequency of the stock assessments, it's not. I mean, you have to know that we have problems to reaching, as you already see, we saw the deadline for the harvest strategy for the skipjack, but we all have to know that the last stock assessment was carried out in 2014. So it's kind of reacting, and we have to transpass this reacting to foresee, to make it systematic, to give the scientists a voice, and agree what is a harvest strategy. Is very simple. Which are the goals? Let's decide the specific goals, not a generic wishes. Then let's the scientists make the modeling, the technical modeling with the MSEs, to take into account the context factors, economic, social, whatever. But which is the best way to reach the goals? That makes the harvest strategy. This harvest strategy is not cannot be a poem, a lyric text. Has to contain the indicators, has to contain the numbers, which is the limit reference point for abundance, which is the target reference point, which are even all the actions have to be described in these harvest control rules. And here, and finishing here, what is very, very important is that when the path is out of the we are not to the target, the response, no reaction, the response is automated. So we already have foreseen how to act when something happens.
That if a harvest strategy is in place.
Yeah.
Yeah,
if not, some catastrophe triggers your reaction. You ask for data, you take decisions, you meet together with no harvest strategy. The guts, the emotions take the floor, and the decisions you run the higher risk of not being rational.
Okay. Well, I think that's very clear. You made a very clear statement. It's good to know that a company like Bolton, who really is influential in the market, takes this stand. And you have clearly clarified why is it so important that these harvest strategies get in place. This automated machine, so to say, that makes the whole process of decisions on what to do with our stocks, what kind of limitation we have to put on it if necessary, etc., is decided on forehand and then automatically rolls out. So we avoid this each year coming together and trying to get consensus on difficult decisions. Better to have it in place in one system under the harvest strategies to make it also for your company more predictable, what kind of supply you can expect, and that you have a guarantee for the future sustainability supply.
That's completely right, Simon.
Okay, thank you very much. We will come back at discussion. Now, from a very huge player, we go to not a small player, but let's say more the fisheries which are on a smaller scale. We have with us Bertrand Wendling and Nolwenn Cosnard. He is Director General, and she is the manager of ICAT, both of Sato One, a cooperative of French fishers who are very much involved with the bluefin tuna, because that actually is the first harvest strategy on our list this year. In November 2022, ICAT has to make a final decision on blue tuna, and that if they succeed, that would mean that after more than 10 years of a lot of work, we have our bluefin tuna back, recovered, but also under a system that guarantees the future of sustainable fisheries. So Bertrand Wendling is trained as a fisheries and agricultural engineer. He was head of Fisheries and Marine Development Service of the French Ministry of Agriculture and worked as a technical advisor in the Seychelles Fishing Authority before joining Satohan in 2005. And he has been closely working on the MSC certification of bluefin tuna. And Noin Kosnar she's trained in aquatic environmental bioscience in the Mediterranean and tropical waters. And since 3 years, she's active at Satohan and was involved with the ICAT negotiations. So welcome. Let's go to slide 2. Maybe you can explain a bit. Many people know that Sète, where you're based, is next to Montpellier, and it's called the Venice of the Languedoc, but we do not know much about Satohan, most of us. Please, can you explain a bit who you are and what is your position in the market?
Hello, everyone. Thank you. So we are a producer organization. We are recognized by the European Union as so. We represent fishermen in the French Mediterranean Sea. We manage fleets, quotas. We are member of different commissions at national and international levels. We build scientific projects, and we also work on the promotion of sea products. So we have about 100 boats that we more than 300 sailors. Those boats are originally placed along the French Mediterranean coast, from the Spanish border to the Italian border. And they mostly fish in the Gulf of Guiana, in the north of the Corse Island, and also in the near the Spanish island, Balearic Island. So we have about 14 purseners, 19 trawlers that fish in the Gulf of Guiana, and about 60 small-scale coastal boats. And those small-scale boats, they fish with different gears, nets, traps, line, long line. And among those, we have 50 small-scale boats that target bluefin tuna exclusively or not along the year. So bluefin tuna represents about more than 60% of the total annual landed volumes. So it's a priority species for our structure. And we represent about 50% of the Mediterranean fish production, all species included.
Yeah, so to make things clear, a lot of your the bluefin tuna you catch, you sell directly to let's say the people who are next to the consumers, or the farms that grow them fatter. That means that because it's a bit different, the bluefin tuna, when it comes to the market than the other tropical tunas, for instance, which is much more a large-scale canning market with big retailers and big traders. You are operating on, let's say, a bit smaller direct scale.
Yes, maybe we can put the next slide for that. Yeah, so we represent about 60% of the total bluefin tuna French quota. That represents 68% of the French Mediterranean bluefin tuna quota, and 70% if we only talk about the small-scale fisheries. So maybe we can put the next image. So our 14 purseners, they fish around more than 3,000 tons of bluefin tuna. They fish not in the French border, they fish around Spain and Malta. They fish during 5 weeks per year, and the tuna is sold to farmers and grown in cages and then exported to Asia, Japan. So this tuna is sold from 7 to 10 euros per kilogram. It's very different from the small scale that we have just next. If you put next on the slide, yeah. So the 50 small scale, they fish around 470 tons in our structure. So that's a total of 3,600 tons that we manage. And then if you put next, you can see that the small scale, they fish daily with line and long lines. They sell on fresh market every day. Mostly direct market or through suppliers. And this tuna is sold between 10 to 20 euros per kilogram. So very different between those two types of fishery.
Yeah, okay. So bluefin tuna is not let's say a bulk tuna fishery, but nonetheless, it's a very important niche market, also because of the price. And not to forget, it's a flagship. It's an icon of tuna fisheries when it comes to sustainability. The reason that many consumers have a feeling that something is wrong eating tuna, as its origin in the endangered situation and the massive action undertaken to avoid that the last bluefin tuna was ending up in Japanese sushis, which started, let's say, 50 years ago. Could you sketch the development of sustainable bluefin tuna fisheries and the initiatives taken to improve sustainable fisheries, Bertrand?
Yes, so maybe put the next slide. So I have provided a quick overview of the history of the bluefin tuna fishery on the slide. In the 19th, as everybody knows, we are facing a problem of international interference with the risk of strong overexploitation of the stock. In 2006, the bluefin tuna recovery plan was established. In 2014, the first positive assessment of the bluefin tuna with an increase of bluefin tuna biomass was observed by scientists. In 2018, the transition from recovery plan to management plan. And in 2020, the last scientific assessment with a constant increase of the bluefin tuna biomass.
Just to explain it, what was the importance of the change of a recovery plan of ICAT into a management plan?
Not a lot of modification, but it's more political issue of the situation of the stocks.
So it was a confirmation that stocks were improving.
Of course, yes. Yeah. So during this period, maybe you could click on next for the slide. Yes. During this period, the Saturn was built a strong scientific partnerships with the projects such as selectivity of the fisheries, with the creation of an EcoSea application to record interactions with sensitive bycatch species, development of new mitigation tools, such as Shark Guards projects. In 2019 and 20, we obtained 2 eco-labels. One is a French official certification named Pêche Durable for sustainable fishery, and of course the MSC certification in 2020. In 2021, we have new projects for reinforcement of the knowledge of the survival rates of the race through the OSF, the Ocean Stewardship Funds. Of course, it is the market that has pushed our organization to develop these certifications and to move towards a long-term sustainable management.
Okay, so you really felt the force of the market that we're asking for the sustainability. That was one of the reasons that you, well, of course, you had your own vision on it too, but it helped you, yeah, to improve the situation and take all this action to make the fisheries you do more sustainable. Now, yes. the final step with Satohan was the MSC certification for the bluefin tuna.
Yes.
That took a lot of attention because many people still thought that bluefin tuna was in a very very difficult situation. So the fact that MSC certification was allowed, at least got a lot of attention in the media and also in the NGOs. What was your experience to get the label, Bertrand?
Okay, for regarding our two certifications, maybe could put next slide. So actually, to date, we have a fleet of about 55 vessels fishing bluefin tuna by long line or pole and line, of which 37 are certified with the French certification Pêche Durable and 43 with the MSC certification. All the vessels are controlled by our structure and externally by a certification body. They have obligations such as respecting quota and fishing periods, compliance with minimum size, requirements on marketing and traceability, environmental and energy obligations, production of quality obligation, and of course, social obligation. All these obligations are pushed by the MSC certification. And it's a strong activity for our organizations now more than 10 years.
Yeah, so in that context, what is the practical importance of harvest strategies for you, especially in this year's ICAT meeting?
Yes, so maybe next slide. Okay, for the harvest strategies, this certification have been a real challenge and represents more than 10 years of work with an active participation of scientific programs to acquire the necessary knowledge of information. For us, harvest strategy as a necessary condition for the MSC certification. And so this year, the decision on harvest strategy on ICAT for bluefin is clearly important to keep the certification for our fisheries and all the investments we built in the fishery.
Okay, so yeah, because that's something very important not to forget. This year's decision on harvest strategy in ICAT is clearly also to keep the certification of MSC and all the investment that you put into it.
Yes, exactly.
Because without harvest strategies, one of the formal conditions to have the MSC certification falls away and you will lose your certification, basically.
Yes, that's true.
Yeah, now that is important thing to know, because that also goes for other tuna, which means that not only fisheries, but also in the market, a lot of the efforts done and invested in MSC certification are lost when these harvest strategies are not in place in times at the RFMOs like ICAT. Yeah, that's an important thing to know. What will you do if it fills with bluefin tuna? That would be a big blow for you, I guess.
Can you repeat?
Well, if these harvest strategies in November are not finalized, what will you do? I mean, it really will be a big blow, no?
Yes, yes, but we will continue all the work that we did with the scientific body, because for us the long-term management of the bluefin tuna is very important for the fishermen and for the market. So I'm sure that the harvest strategy will be a success for the fishery. And as you know, we are now one of the only one to have the two certification, the French one and the MSC, and we push all the body to go to the harvest strategy. So we need to continue all the controls to be sure that the bluefin tuna is sustainable managed with a long-term strategy, and we try to involve all the body and the NGO and the market in this way.
Okay, thank you very much for
Thank
this
you.
explanation. It's very clear what is at stake for bluefin tuna and also for other tuna, as a matter of fact. Sorry. Now we have a short poll as a break before the next and last speaker, to have some opinion of the audience. I like to ask Tom to take it over for a minute to do the poll.
Okay, thank you very much, Stephen. So we've got a quick poll for you. It should be a simple yes or no. The question is, do you agree that ICAT should prioritize implementation of harvest strategies for commercial tunas, starting with Atlantic bluefin at this year's commission meeting? The purpose of this poll is for us to get an idea of what you're thinking on that, but also to enable us to use this in our advocacy as well, to sort of note X% of participants believe this was the case. So we'll leave it open for a minute. And I will give you the poll results after the next presentation.
Okay, well, let's wait on that. That will be the roundtable, I guess. Thank you very much, Tom. Then we go to the last speaker of this afternoon, which is not actually on tuna, but on swordfish. We took it also in this webinar because of the fact that also swordfish has to be part of the harvest strategies policies. And yeah, to explain that, we have Shana Miller. She's a scientist and project director of the International Fisheries Conservation of the Ocean Foundation, and she's also manager of the harveststrategy.org webpage, which in this context, of course, is an important page to view, and where you can find the latest development when it comes to harvest strategies. Shana is a scientist and has been involved for a very long time with fisheries management conferences at ICAT on tuna and other species, as the global director of Tuna Conservation Program of the Ocean Foundation. And of course, she also was closely involved with the Atlantic bluefin tuna. Welcome, Shana. Are you there?
I am here. Thank you, Stephen.
Good night. Shana is at the other side of the world at the moment, so she has been out of her bed. It's 4 o'clock. Oh no, 3:30 in the morning. So keep it up, Shana.
I will do my best to stay awake.
Okay. So can you explain specifically what is the state of the stocks of the North Atlantic swordfish?
Yes, so swordfish is considered, you know, at ICAT. ICAT, of course, primarily manages tunas, but swordfish is another important commodity that ICAT manages. It's considered a tuna-like species. It's caught in a lot of the same fisheries and considered a target species because it is quite valuable for global markets. And so on this slide here, we see on the left panel the population size since 1950. And like the tunas, because there has been, you know, a significant fishery on this stock, there's been a steady decline since the 1950s. But starting in the mid to late 90s, there was a major effort to rebuild the stock, and that was done successfully. And we've been, you know, hovering above the sustainable target level ever since. And so it's in good shape at this point. There's a new assessment in June, at the end of June, and so we'll get an updated stock status. You see the last assessment only went through 2015, so we'll get an updated glance at the picture of stock status for swordfish, but it's expected to still be not overfished and not subject to overfishing. And so the The fisheries statistics are in the right panel, and with catch landings in blue, and then the total allowable catch, the catch limit in red. And you see for the last, gosh, 2 decades, really, the catches have been well below the allowable level. And that is in large part due to the US having regulations in place that don't, we're not in the US catching our full quota. And so that's why you see that the catch is so far below the TAC. But the majority of North Atlantic swordfish is caught by EU fleets. That Spain and Portugal alone account for over 50% of the catch, followed by the US and then Morocco and Canada. So it's a smaller number of nations involved in this fishery, certainly compared to the tropical tunas we heard about earlier.
Yeah. How did the management on swordfish develop in time? And it's also exemplary for harvest strategy, how it should be developed for tuna and ICAT?
Yes, so how the harvest strategy is being developed, or how the management for rebuilding, for example, was developed? Are you asking?
I guess they started first with rebuilding, and then now we're looking for how the harvest strategies will be implemented.
Yeah, so you'll see from the red line that it started in the late 90s. That was when the first catch limit was put in place, when the stock, pretty soon after the stock was seen to be in a dangerous condition. And so ICAT, it took a couple years to respond, but they did respond in a relatively timely manner. And part of that was due to a major retail campaign called Give Swordfish a Break. And it was really encouraging retailers and consumers to boycott swordfish. And I think that created some pretty significant political will for ICAT to, put catch limits in place and rebuild the stock. And that rebuilding plan was quite successful, as you see from, the rebuilding. So yes,
in a sense, it was a market involvement that gave the push.
Yeah, and it's a good example of how the market voice can be hugely influential at ICAT. Okay. And we can get into the development of harvest strategies in the next slide, please.
Yeah, because that, of course, is what is on the agenda now to finish this harvest strategies process for the swordfish.
Exactly. And so for swordfish, the idea is to use a harvest strategy to keep the population at this sustainable level, rather than having to have a rebuilding part of the harvest strategy. So here's a rough timeline of where we have come so far. Swordfish was one of the priority stocks identified for harvest strategy development back in 2015. And the MSE modeling side that Hilario spoke about was started in earnest in 2018. And then in 2019, the ICAT, the commission, adopted conceptual management objectives, the different safety, stability, status, and catch management objectives that Hilario also talked about. The ICAT adopted a limit reference point for swordfish all the way back in 2013. Actually, they set a limit reference point of 40% of the biomass that would allow maximum sustainable yield. So ICAT's been doing this for swordfish for some time. So they did a good job of adopting the management objectives towards the beginning of the process back in 2019. And then last year already, they took the MSE model and had an independent review, and they changed a few things in the model, and the independent review was very favorable and endorsed the modeling process. So that was that was a good step for ICAT to take last year as well. And then that brings us to this year. Next slide, please. And there are a number of steps, important steps on the work plan for this year. Like I said, there's a new assessment in June. And so the MSE will all be updated based on that new assessment. And it'll take, you know, a couple months for the modeler to do that update. And then there'll be a meeting for conversation among the scientists, managers, and stakeholders in November. So there's a dedicated meeting on November 13th, the day before the main annual meeting starts. That is panel 4, which is a subgroup of ICAT focused on swordfish and sharks and some other bycatch species. But so there's a dedicated panel 4 meeting on November 13th. And one of the primary items on that agenda is the swordfish MSE modeling process to develop this harvest strategy. And I had mentioned that the commission adopted conceptual general management objectives in 2019, but this year they're slated in November to make those more specific and measurable and what we call operationalize them. So for example, in 2019, the commission said, we don't want the population to be overfished or subject to overfishing. This year, we need to say, you know, what probability we don't want that scenario to happen. And so that'll be an important step for the commission to take.
Yeah. Now it looks like that the whole process took well more than 15 years, something like that. 10, 15 years to the point where we are now, but you talk about it like it's going quite smoothly. And with a little luck, we have next year the harvest strategies in place. Is that correct?
Yes, so it will really be pretty much a 5-year process from initiation of the management strategy evaluation to adoption, assuming things stay on track for adoption next year, which there's, I mean, it's looking quite good. You know, swordfish isn't quite as controversial as some of the other stocks. There's fewer fishing nations involved. The stock is healthy. You know, there's a lot of encouraging signs that we'll be able to have this on track for adoption next year. The independent expert, MSE expert, who's been hired by ICAT to conduct this work has done a really great job. One of the things this year he's developed as part of his software, there are 100 different candidate harvest strategies that are automatically tested. And so one of the things that's happening this year is the individual member governments are able to propose other harvest strategies to test. So depending on how that goes, you know, that'll be an important step between next year and adoption, you know, between now and adoption next year as well. But things are looking really good for swordfish next year. And you know, as we heard from Satuan, you know, getting bluefin adopted this year will really pave the way for swordfish adoption next year.
Yeah, okay. Well, this is running smoothly, so to say. Let's see what happens next year. Thank you very much for the explanation. Just one last question. You have a lot of experience in ICAT. You've been following the whole negotiations for how many years?
I'm going to date myself. It's been almost 25 years.
25 years. So you are quite experienced. Can you just maybe to make it a bit broader, what makes it so difficult to put these harvest strategies in place? You already mentioned, okay, swordfish is not a problem, stocks are fine, it's not too controversial. The other ones, why is it always such a hell of a job to get these harvest strategies in place in the management organizations?
Well, Dr. Antonio Di Natale had put in the chat that the input data can be a challenge. And so part of the process of harvest strategy development is to work with the data and make sure it's in good shape before proceeding with the MSE, so that the beginning steps on the science side can be tricky. And then, you know, that can take a couple of years. And then it's really important, you know, one of the hallmarks of the harvest strategies process is to have this iterative exchange among scientists, managers, and stakeholders. And ICAT has done a relatively good job with that. You know, for bluefin, we've had, I mean, this year there are 3 different meetings scheduled, and the swordfish group is proposing the same for next year. And so these steps to get a robust harvest strategy in place that's likely to be successful, you know, it takes some time. And so I wouldn't say ICAT has done anything wrong. There is an initial investment that you then get the payoff, that we've heard, you know, a number of the speakers talk about today, you know, the benefits of once you have a harvest strategy in place. And, you know, there is an initial investment to get to that point.
Yeah, it's clearly, but it's also clearly a political process, which the countries involved, the member states are putting up their interests first and try to influence the final harvest strategy that comes out of it, out of all those alternatives that are produced by science, correctly? Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you very much, Shana. It was a clear explanation, and it also helps a bit to see to put the harvest strategies in perspective, also when it comes to the other tuna. Yes. Well, that brings us to the last part of this webinar. But first we have the outcome of the poll. Tom, inform us.
Drum roll. Yes, 100% of attendees.
That's almost like old communist times, where 100% of the votes goes to the. That shouldn't it be 98 or maybe 89?
I'm afraid it was a unanimous result. I mean, I don't think it comes as a surprise, really. It is common sense, and I think that's come through with many of the presentations, Stephen.
Yeah. Well, it's a pity that we don't have at least one member of the audience that is totally against it, but would be interesting to hear that vision. Okay, that's a good result. Let's go to the round table to as the last part of this webinar. Can we have all the participants in view? I hope Shana didn't move to bed. No, there she is. Yeah. Okay, do we have everybody? I can't see. Yes. Yeah, we all done. Okay. Yeah, just to have to start with the first question. Maybe for Tom and Flory, to start with you. You explained your efforts to engage the trade and retail with the management policies in the tuna RFMOs like ICAT, the management organizations. Are you planning some steps in ICAT, some specific steps in ICAT this year on the European level to engage the market with what will be decided not only in November, but in the next years to come on harvest strategies?
I think the simple answer is yes, Stephen. There's a number of different delegates at ICAT who we will engage with. But in terms of the European Union, yes, we will be engaging through LDAC, the Long Distance Advisory Council, as well as through direct engagement with members of DG Mare, but also political decision makers as well. One of the things we are evolving at the moment is working with some of our partners, some of our larger partners, government relations teams, and actually using them to gain access to political advisors, political decision makers. So yes, we certainly be doing that, and we I imagine we will be doing some joint efforts with TUPA as well.
Okay. Well, we are eager to know about that. When will you come out with that? Any idea? That will be after the summer, or?
After IOTC, then we'll start working on the next RFMOs.
Okay. To be exactly at this moment right now, the IOTC is
less than a month away. Yeah,
less than a month away. So all the energy is going there. Also, an important sourcing area, of course, for the European market, with a lot of controversies. Also, when it comes to harvest strategies. Let's see what comes out there. Yes, I just wanted to mix it a bit with the questions asked. I think that there are still some open. Now I have a question here of Igini Hernandez, who is a culinary collaborator of LLC in the USA, and it's a question for Hilario. How is the MSC different to the recovery plan initiated in 2007? Now, this is a very, very, very specific question, but just to not leave it unanswered, could you briefly answer it?
Thanks, Stephen. It's already answered.
Okay. You're typing in an answer. I see.
He made a second question, so I answered the second question. But I think it's a natural process, a logical continuation of the recovery plan. However, now with the stock in a better situation, then the objectives of the management goals or the harvest strategy will be different from previous recovery plans. So it's something that the CPCs and ICAT need to agree on. Okay. Thanks.
I have a question for Hector Fernandez. Now, Bolton is, as said, a power player in the market. You invest in the MSC certification for sustainable tuna. Now, we have seen serious problems in the Northeast Atlantic, in the Northeast Atlantic Fishery Commission, to be exactly, with herring, mackerel, and whiting. They were suspended from the MSC label because the management procedures were not in place. That caused a lot of troubles, of course, because suddenly retailers had to skip the MSC label from these products, and also the market was a bit left in doubt what exactly is sustainable when we want to have it in our trade. Could you paint what are the consequences if ICAT will fail to put harvest strategies in place for the tropical tunas that you depend on in your sourcing? Hector. I don't hear Hector. Maybe it's me.
I was mute. Sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah. Firstly, saying that the situation of the small pelagics in the Northeast Atlantic Ocean is a matter of that worries us, and we are joined past months the NAPA group for advocacy for regaining the sustainability and regaining the MSC certification. Sometimes I feel that because it is visual, that we say that the goal is gaining or regaining the MSC certification. That is not. It is a consequence of regaining the level of sustainability that we all work for. In this case, we as a company, and I think almost everybody in the sector agrees that principle one of MSC is crucial for the long-term sustainable management of the fishery, and it has to have the deadlines. And in the case of the harvest strategies for the Atlantic Ocean, we know that for the yellowfin in particular, we do have the deadline that is in 2023, I think, in May 2023, and also the timer is running for getting the harvest strategy in place for the skipjack that I mentioned. The last stock assessment was in 2014, so we kind of forgot about this species because we thought, it's not going to have any problem. Never. It's not. So this is kind of wishful thinking and not based on science. That again, we are just arguing in circles. But anyhow, yes, if we do not have harvest strategies in place, we cannot assure the long-term sustainability of the stock, and this translates into the losing of the MSC certification, or not being able to get this MSC certification because there are not comprehensive and credible management measures in place. And this is always the case of the importance, the critical importance of the harvest strategies in all the FMOs and in all the fisheries.
Yeah. Okay, that's clear. Tom, you want to maybe add something? You have been quite involved with this situation in the Northeast Atlantic too.
Really, just to say that commercial pressure is what's driving the pace beyond that glacial pace. I've been told by delegates that what they need is urgency. So these are delegates who are looking to get things moving forward, and they need urgency injected into these discussions. And market pressure provides that urgency, because it does have a bearing upon the political masters of delegations. So yeah, we've got to be smarter about how we utilize this. We've got to work together. We're doing that with Tupa, for example, in tuna. Napa is doing that on northeastern pelagics, but we need to work even closer together to try to consolidate what the market is calling for and what the consequences will be if things don't change.
Okay, that's clear. Just connecting with this situation, we just heard Hector telling about the last assessment of yellowfin. Was it yellowfin or skipjack of 2014? Yeah, skipjack, sorry. So that's 8 years ago. Hilario, Murua, ISSF has a reputation for their research. How do you estimate the development of Atlantic tuna stocks and the way they are monitored scientifically in ICAT?
Stephen, sorry, could you please repeat the question?
The question is, we just seen that part of the problems, or part of the, let's say, problems to get harvest strategies in place is that the scientific background is not always in place. We have to work with assessments on skipjack of 8 years ago. Could you, because ISSF has a quite good reputation when it comes to research, what is your opinion of how the stocks are monitored scientifically in ICAT?
I think it's as in other reports, the stock assessment are done correctly. I mean, there are uncertainty associated to each of the species and stock assessment. So depending on the species and region or fisheries, the uncertainty is larger, but in general terms, the stock assessment are carried out following best practices and based on best available science. In the case of skipjack, this year there will be a new stock assessment. And the problem we had in 2014 was that we had not any abundance index to use for the stock assessment, so it was quite uncertain stock assessment. This year we will have a new one based on the fat buoy ecosonder biomass signal. So I hope that stock assessment will be done this year and will be the best available science to provide the management advice. And for the rest of the species that we are talking about, the bluefin tuna, swordfish, and the rest of the tropicals, I think the science behind the stock assessment is correct, and it's enough to develop the operating models and the management strategy evaluation to adopt the harvest strategies.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
in short, in general, it's good.
So it's not an excuse to, that's not the problem, so to say, to get the harvest strategies in place.
In fact, I think the harvest strategy, another advantage is that it's able to address more uncertainty, and the harvest strategy that is adopted at the end should be robust to minor uncertainties. So for example, as Antonio Di Natale mentioned, if the input data for one particular species in biology is a bit uncertain, the harvest strategy that is designed and adopted should address and be robust to that particular uncertainty on biological data. So that is also an advantage of harvest strategy against the stock assessment approach, the current approach.
Thank you. Now, last question. By the way, the panelists can intervene if they want. Bertrand Wendling and Noël Cosnard, this is, of course, an important year for you, but also for all the other people who have been involved with bluefin tuna. You wrote in an opinion article that will be published that you often joke that every year is a bluefin tuna year for ICAT negotiations, but this really is the biggest bluefin year of all. Just to resume, why is it so important to get this final piece of harvest strategies in place?
Yes, indeed, you are right. And it's a very important year because of all the reasons we have exposed, and because also being a certified fishery, we have to always improve our management and our action on that subject. So this will be a huge improvement for the management of these quotas. And so we are strongly in favor of its implementation, and the sooner the better.
Okay, that's clear. Thank you very much. So with this, this conclusion, the sooner the better, I want to end this webinar. We are just within the time. I'd like to thank Pew, GTA, TUPA, and harveststrategies.org for co-hosting this event. I hope you did learn and enjoyed it as I did. I thank the translators for their work, and most of all, I thank you, the audience that participated in this event. We hope that it became clear that harvest strategies are not some abstract, faraway concepts, but deal with the reality of sustainable management of the tuna stocks. And I hope that as a result of this webinar, the engagement of trade and retail further increases to really defend the interests of sustainable management on a European level and in ICAT. Thank you very much, and maybe see you at next week Seafood Expo in Barcelona.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.